The last time a new Pokemon type was added, it was a disaster. The year was 2014 when Pokemon X and Y introduced the Fairy type, and things were immediately thrown into chaos. See, Pokemon's complex type relationships are balanced extremely precariously, and the addition of Fairy threw things totally out of whack, as it became apparent very quickly that Fairy was only balanced if your idea of balance is someone falling off a tightrope. Fairy was so good and the game changed so dramatically that I personally thought that Pokemon would never add another new type again. So imagine my shock and horror when Pokemon announced 10 years later that a new type was going to be added in the Indigo Disc DLC. And if it was even close to as strong as the Fairy type, this was going to be a problem. And even if it wasn't very good, I mean, there's just no way of telling how one more new type would affect all the existing types. It really doesn't take much to throw the game balance out of whack. As the DLC got closer and closer, it felt like competitive Pokemon was barreling towards a future there would be no turning back from. Except the DLC came and went and basically nothing changed. Pokemon's newest type, the Stellar type, was a complete dud. The Fairy type shifted the trajectory of competitive Pokemon forever, but the Stellar type, well, it didn't really do anything. But why? What happened to the Stellar type? Well, the first thing we need to understand is that despite being marketed as the 19th Pokemon type, the Stellar type behaves differently than a regular Pokemon type. First, there aren't Stellar type Pokemon. In fact, the only way to have a Pokemon be Stellar type is via terastallization. Even the mascot Pokemon for the Stellar type, Terapagos, is actually a normal type Pokemon until it terastallizes. There also aren't Stellar type moves. The only way you can use a Stellar type attack is via Terra Blast, which does damage based on your Terra type, or Terapagos' signature move, Terra Star Storm, which is a normal move unless Terapagos is Terra Stellar. Okay, so if there aren't Stellar type Pokemon and there also aren't Stellar type moves, what's the point? Well, that's a great question. What is the point? Let's talk about what happens when a Pokemon terastallizes to Stellar. And can I just say, I think all of you are Stellar. Unlike every other type in the game, the Stellar type doesn't have weaknesses or resistances. Because there are no Pokemon that can access the Stellar type without terastallizing, the Pokemon Company chose to treat the Stellar type more like a modifier on a Pokemon's base types, rather than a new, distinct type. So when a Pokemon terastallizes into the Stellar type, it keeps all of its original weaknesses and resistances. So Terra Stellar Pikachu is weak to ground and resists electric, flying, and steel type moves. In other words, terastallizing into the Stellar type does absolutely nothing to change your Pokemon's defensive relationships. Instead, it affects a Pokemon's offense. When a Pokemon terastallizes into one of the standard types, it gets an offensive boost to moves of its Terra type. If a Pokemon terastallizes into a type that it didn't already have, such as Hydreigon becoming Terra Fire, all moves of the Terra type get a 50% boost. If the Pokemon terastallizes into a type it did already have, well, it was already getting a 50% boost thanks to something called Same Type Attack Bonus, or STAB for short. So instead, this STAB multiplier gets changed to a 100% boost, which is about a 33% increase. If you don't like math, you don't need to remember the details of this interaction. Just keep in mind that whatever type a Pokemon terastallizes into makes moves of that type stronger. Easy enough? But like I said, there are no Stellar type moves. So how does the Stellar type interact with the Pokemon's offenses? The answer is, it's really confusing. The Stellar type boosts every single type of move a Pokemon uses, but the catch is, it only boosts them the first time they use a move of each type. So if I have Terra Stellar Pikachu, I get a boost on Thunderbolt and on Surf. But after I've hit something with Thunderbolt, I no longer have a boost on any electric moves, though I do still have one on Surf. This is in direct contrast to the standard Terra types, which provide a boost indefinitely to moves of your Terra type. I feel like I'm going to say Terra type like a more billion times in this video, but you're going to have to bear with me because I wrote the script and I don't know how to do this video without saying Terra type a million times. But if it's annoying you, believe me, it's annoying me too. Let's just forget about it. Forget I said anything. Also, how much the Stellar type boosts moves is really weird. For moves matching one of the Pokemon's types, the multiplier is the same. 100% more total damage, or a 33% increase over the initial 50% increase from stab. There has got to be a clearer way of saying that. I am super sorry. If it's confusing, it's 100% on me, but I don't know how to convey that in more clearly. I really don't know. I'm super sorry. Let's just continue. The difference is that for moves of a type that the Pokemon didn't already have, such as Hydreigon's Flamethrower, the The increase is a measly 20% compared to the 50% it would be with a dedicated Terra type. This is a massive catch. Not only are any moves not matching a type of your Pokemon noticeably weaker than they would be if you committed your Terra to them, but also all of your moves only get boosted one time per type. Of course, there are benefits as well. Normally, your Terra type can only boost one type of move, so being able to boost them all is actually pretty useful. Also, I kind of lied. I told you there were no Stellar type moves, but there actually is one, Terra Blast. When you terastallize to the Stellar type, you gain access to Terra Stellar Terra Blast, which is the only way currently to use a Stellar type move because Terapagos is not legal yet. So which types resist Terra Stellar Terra Blast and which types are weak to it? The answer to both questions is none. Stellar type moves have no resistances and no weaknesses, completely unlike every other type in the game. While not hitting any Pokemon for super effective damage might sound like a pretty big deal, not being able to resist this move with any Pokemon more than makes up for it. And I lied again. The Stellar type can hit some Pokemon for super effective damage. Any Pokemon that has terastallized regardless of their base type. This is one of the only ways of hitting Pokemon that are trying to use terastallization to eliminate all their weaknesses, such as Terra Electric Cresselia. And this isn't even the end of the oddities of the Stellar type. See, Terra Blast gets weird only when used with the Stellar type. Rather than being an 80 power move like it is for literally every other type in the game, it's instead 100 power. And instead of having no effect beyond doing damage, Terra Stellar Terra Blast lowers the user's attack and special attack stats by one stage after hitting a Pokemon with the move. So, as a recap, terastallizing to Stellar doesn't change a Pokemon's weaknesses or resistances, gives them an offensive boost to every move, but only for the first use of each type, and lets them use an unresistible Terra Blast that weakens the user after it hits something. And it doesn't work. Well, I mean, I guess it works as intended, but nobody's using it. And I think there's actually a couple good reasons for this. Mostly, the Stellar type just isn't very good. First, not changing anything about your weaknesses and resistances is, to use a Latin phrase, not great. Even Pokemon that use their Terra offensively tend to get defensive benefits too, like how Terra Fairy Fluttermane loses its weakness to Ghost, allowing it to not only boost its Fairy type moves, but also no longer be weak to opposing Fluttermane. Or how Urshifu Rapid Strike turns off its weaknesses to Flying, Fairy, and Psychic when it terastallizes to Water. Even a Pokemon like Ogerpon Water, who can't choose its Terra type, actually loses all three of its weaknesses in exchange for two new ones by terastallizing to Water. So you can see that even when a Pokemon terastallizes into a type it already has, it often still gets some kind of defensive benefit. Okay, but nobody is using Terra Stellar defensively. What about the offensive benefits? Being able to boost every single type of move has gotta be good, right? Well, yes, it is good, but only being able to boost them a single time? Is that really worth it? Most of the time, if you're going to terastallize a Pokemon, you probably want it to stay on the field for at least a couple of turns. And with Terra Stellar, if you overstay your welcome, you'll have nothing to show for it. Now, this isn't rocket science, but most Pokemon want to use their strongest move. Almost every Pokemon in the game has one move that's stronger than all the others. Only getting a boost on this move a single time is a real liability, especially because if you forego Terra Stellar and have your Terra type match the type of your strongest move, you don't need to limit yourself to a single use. So what kind of Pokemon even want to use Terra Stellar? Let's think about this. First, we can eliminate all Pokemon that want a defensive Terra, since Stellar Terra doesn't change a Pokemon's defensive relationships. Second, we probably want Pokemon that aren't going to stay on the field for too long, since the offensive benefits run out quickly. Third, we want Pokemon that have multiple moves that are very strong, especially Pokemon with two types, so they can best utilize Stellar Terra. I think one obvious place to start looking is with Pokemon that hold items such as the Choice Specs, who normally run 4 offensive moves and are built specifically to do as much damage as possible. But the problem with Stellar Terra on, say, Choice Specs Fluttermane is that while you do have the ability to boost any of your moves, the Choice Specs prevents you from changing which move you're using without switching out, meaning most of the time, you're only going to be getting a boost a single time. In actuality, the types of Pokemon that have seen the most success with Terra Stellar are Pokemon that hold the Focus Sash item, preventing them from being knocked out in a single hit. These Pokemon are good candidates for the type as they're almost always trained to maximize their speed and offense, since the Focus Sash helps them stay alive anyway, meaning the defensive drawbacks aren't as meaningful. And the Focus Sash doesn't restrict their move usage, allowing them to get more value out of Terra Stellar. Pokemon like Chien-Pao, Urshifu Dark, and Fluttermane are the main Pokemon using Terrastellar right now when they hold the Focus Sash, so it does have some usage. But the thing is, even on the Pokemon it's best suited for, the Stellar type just isn't that good. Chien-Pao typically runs 3 different types of moves: Ice, Fighting, and Dark. And it doesn't really need the defensive benefits of a Terra type, as it's going to be knocked out in 2 moves most of the time. And on Chien-Pao, it's nice to be able to boost all of your moves, doing more damage than normal. Plus, Chien-Pao doesn't typically last long enough to really mind Terrastellar's one-time boost per type. But the thing is, the Terra type Chien-Pao usually runs is Ghost. Terra Ghost is amazing on Chien-Pao because it can use it to get around Fake Out, which breaks its Focus Sash and forces it to flinch, as well as all fighting type moves, which bring it down to its Focus Sash, and the powerful priority attack Extreme Speed. I think of Ghost less as a defensive type and more as a type that gives you some utility. There's just so much value you get out of becoming immune to 2 different types that, even with Chien-Pao being a prime candidate for Terrastellar, most players still prefer to use Ghost. What about Urshifu Dark? It's another Focus Sash user, and it has 2 incredibly powerful attacks in Wicked Blow and Close Combat that both benefit a lot from Terrastellar. Is Terrastellar the best on Focus Sash Urshifu Dark? Well, I don't think so. In this case, you'd rather use Terra Dark. See, Urshifu also gets the Dark type priority move, Sucker Punch, and you can use this move to get some parting damage down on an opponent before Urshifu gets knocked out. With Terra Dark, you boost not only the powerful Wicked Blow, but also Sucker Punch. And since Urshifu can attack through Protect, if you can preserve it well and get 2 or 3 strong attacks off, you'll often find yourself doing more damage than your opponents can handle. But if you use Terrastellar, you'll only get the boost on a single Wicked Blow and maybe a Close Combat if you're lucky. And you'll probably miss out on bonus damage on Sucker Punch more often than not. Dark is a strictly better Terra type in any game where you don't click Close Combat, and is the option for a one-time boost on the move that Urshifu tends to click the least often really worth giving up so much damage on your Dark type moves? It's a similar story for Focus Sash Fluttermane, who often runs Moonblast, Shadow Ball, and Dazzling Gleam as its attacks of choice. Just like Urshifu, Fluttermane appreciates boosting its 2 strongest moves, but then ending up with a Dazzling Gleam that does basically nothing? It seems like you're leaving a lot on the table just for a boost to a move you might not even use. Not to mention that since all these Pokemon are holding the Focus Sash item, they're not using a different item to boost their damage. So really, they need all the help they can get if they're going to go through the trouble of terastallizing. So with even the best users of Terrastellar being, not that good, we're left with 2 questions. Will the Stellar type ever be worth using in the future? And what would they need to change to fix the Stellar type? Let's start with the second one. First, I don't think the Stellar type needs to be fixed. Obviously, it's not very good, but I think it's actually healthier for the game that Stellar sucks. A type that is unresistible is inherently unhealthy because there's no defensive counterplay. A huge part of Pokemon battles is switching in a Pokemon with a good matchup to deal with a threat. And a type that has no weaknesses and no resistances is kind of playing a different game. That being said, if I did have to fix the type, there's a couple places I would start. First, I'd make non-stab move boosts equivalent to how it works with the other Terra types. A 50% boost rather than a 20% one. I don't think this would be overpowered, as you often still prefer to use your stab moves, and you would still only get the boost a single time. If Stellar type enthusiasts still wanted more buffs, I'd probably recommend changing the boosts to, instead of being 1 time per type, instead decreasing with each use. Something like 50% of the first move, 30% of the second, 10% of the third, and then no boost afterwards. If that still wasn't enough, the last thing I would think to try is going back to only the first move of each type being boosted, but making that boost bigger than what it is with a traditional Terra. So if Terra Fairy Fluttermane gets a 2 times damage boost on Fairy moves, maybe Terra Stellar Fluttermane gets a 2.25 times damage boost on its first Fairy and Ghost type attacks. This would probably be a bit too strong, but you would still have the once per type drawback to balance it out a little bit. Of course, this is just theoretical. Because the Stellar type is tied directly to terastallization, I don't expect it to be making a return in future games. So it's pretty unlikely that it'll receive balancing adjustments. The bigger question in my mind has to do with the rest of Scarlet and Violet. Will the Stellar type ever be good? And my answer is no, kind of. I don't think that Terrastellar will ever be anything more than a niche pick that works on a handful of Pokemon. I think it'll be usable, and I think some players will find success with it, but but on the whole, I just can't see it being mainstream. There's just so many downsides. The opportunity cost of using Stellar as your Terra type compared to a standard type is just too steep. But there is one exception. One way that I could see the Stellar type actually being good. We haven't talked yet about the legendary Pokemon that introduced the Stellar type to the game, Terapagos. Terapagos is a normal type Pokemon with 3 different forms. Its normal form can't be accessed in battle, and I think it's only here for marketing purposes. When Terapagos enters a battle, it transforms into its terrestrial form, and can only access its final stellar form by, well, terrestrializing to the Stellar type. Terapagos' ability, type, and stats change dramatically depending on which form it's in. In its terrestrial form, it has decent stats and an ability that makes all moves do not very effective damage while it's at full HP. In its stellar form, however, it becomes way tankier and gets stronger. Plus, its ability changes to Terraform 0, an ability eerily similar to Mega Rayquaza's Delta Stream, in that it wipes out the effects of all weather on the field and also removes terrain, something not possible via an ability before. Lastly, Terapagos becomes a pure Stellar type Pokemon when in its Stellar form, meaning it has no weaknesses and no resistances as the only Stellar type Pokemon in the game. The other major change to Terapagos between its forms is its signature move, Terra Star Storm. This is a very powerful normal type move with no penalty or risk for using it, and it becomes even stronger when Terapagos is Stellar type, becoming the only sole Stellar type move and changing to hit both opponents. So, just to be clear, this is an unresistible move that hits both opponents that deals super effective damage to anything that's terrestrialized with no drawback, coming off a super tanky Pokemon with respectable offenses and no weaknesses. In theory, it sounds extremely powerful, but when the Indigo Disc released, players began testing Terapagos, and from what I heard, it was pretty underwhelming. The thing is, Terapagos is a restricted Pokemon, meaning you can only use it when other powerful Pokemon such as Calyrex, Zacian, Koraidon, and Miraidon are legal. Not only is Terapagos slower than all those Pokemon, it's also not as strong. Each of these Pokemon gets an incredibly powerful burst move that they can couple with their monstrous attacking stats, quickly eliminating threatening Pokemon, whereas Terapagos really excels at spreading damage over several turns. Also, in order for Terapagos to be threatening, it needs to terrestrialize, as you're giving up so much bulk and damage otherwise. This makes it much more inflexible than other restricted Pokemon who have the option of terrestrializing, but can also be used well without it. So does this mean Terapagos is bad? I don't know, but my gut is that it can be good. I think it's probably a Pokemon that requires a really specific team built around it, and unlike many other restricted legendary Pokemon, you'll probably need to give it a lot of help if you want it to move before your opponent. That being said, I have a feeling that if players invest the time and energy to build a team that can support Terapagos, they'll be rewarded. I don't think Terapagos will ever be like the main legendary Pokemon people are using, but I could absolutely see it winning tournaments when used by the right player. So with all that being said, did the Stellar type actually fail? Honestly, maybe. Of all the new mechanics Pokemon has added over the years, I think it'll go down as one of the weakest. But is that a bad thing? I don't think so. Stellar is a really cool concept, and I'm personally happy that we got to experience the Pokemon Company experimenting with it in a way that doesn't completely break the game. The real irony is that the Indigo Disc did completely shake up competitive play. Not because of the introduction of the Stellar type, but because they added Incineroar.